Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the marketplace. Coming up, Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana increases key lending rate by 50 basis points to hit 30%.
Ghana's macroeconomic framework requires decisive tightening from both the fiscal and monetary side to anchor inflation expectations firmly on the declining path. Given these considerations and under the current circumstances, the committee has decided to increase the monetary policy rate by 0.5% to 30%.
Also coming up, interest rates on the money market return to 30% bracket as government accepts all bids tendered for the Treasury bills. And National Petroleum Authority finally set to implement the National Cylinder Recirculation Program for September this year. After initial setbacks, we'll get reaction from the LPG Marketers. My name is Daryl. Kwawu. Thanks for being with us. Details coming up. Thanks for staying with us, everyone. First up, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has increased its policy rate marginally. The committee adjusted its key lending rate by 50 basis points to 30%. Addressing the media a while ago, the Bank of Ghana Governor Dr. Ernest Addison said the spike is part of measures to contain soaring inflation. He indicated that additional measures will be taken should need be to deal with threats to growth.
Regarding the monetary policy consultation clause, inflation as of June 2023 was within the target band. After declining consistently between January to April, headline inflation increased in May and June on account of a variety of factors, including higher food prices, implementation of new tax measures, and utility tariff adjustments. Overall, inflation increased from 41.2% in April to 42.2% in May, and then further to 42.5% in June. Underlying measures of inflation have all ticked up in May 2023. While core inflation ticked up, business expectations of inflation remain flat at an elevated level. Although inflation is expected to decline in the near term, baseline forecasts show a slightly higher elevated profile in the year ahead, which, if not contained, could embed in underlying inflationary pressures. It is important that policy responds appropriately and decisively to prevent these risks from becoming embedded and consequently derail the disinflation process. In the committee's assessment, risks to the inflation profile are judged to be elevated, driven by second-round effects of food prices. Inflation has persistently hovered around 42% throughout the second quarter of 2023, even though central bank financing has been eliminated in the first 6 months of the year. Ghana's macroeconomic framework requires decisive tightening from both the fiscal and monetary side to anchor inflation expectations firmly on the declining path. Given these considerations and under the current circumstances, the committee has decided to increase the monetary policy rate by 0.5% to 30%. In the coming months, the committee will monitor closely incoming inflation data and will respond appropriately if needed should inflation persist.
Meantime, interest rates on the money market returned to the 30% bracket as the government mobilizes more funds to finance maturing debt. According to the auction result by the Bank of Ghana, the government accepted all bids tendered for the Treasury bills by the investors to the tune of 2.699 billion cedis.
The T-bill sale was oversubscribed by a marginal 1.70%, but a rising interest cost is a major concern to all stakeholders. The yield on the 364-day bill inched up to 30.04% from the previous 29.65%. That of the 91-day bill shot up by 0.39% to 24.92%. Again, the 182-day bill also escalated to 26.80% from 26.40% previously. In the first 4 months of this year, the government domestic debt went up by a significant 15.6 billion cedis. According to the results by the Bank of Ghana, about 1.785 billion cedis were tendered for the 91-day bill. All the bids were accepted. A little about 557 million cedis were, however, mobilized from the one-year bill.
All right, so as we have been reporting this afternoon, the central bank has increased its key lending rate by 50 basis points to hit 30%. We want to get some reaction to that. Joining us on Zoom is Courage Boti, who is the research lead at GCB Capital. Good afternoon to you. And so I think we're expecting this to happen since inflation went up also in the month of June. Is this a good decision by the central bank, Courage?
Well, good afternoon to your listeners. Personally, I was expecting a rate hold for reasons that I think there's uptick in inflation for the last 2 months were temporal in nature. And I expected that given the dynamics of exchange rate, fuel prices generally on the market, and then the fact that there is a base pulling inflation down, these things should be enough to probably outweigh the upside push from things like the utility tariff adjustment and the second round effect of these revenue measures that probably shot up inflation over the last 2 months, really. But the central bank held a different opinion. I think the assessment of the dynamics on the energy market as things stand, where OPEC Plus is trying to push up prices through production control, there is the hint that there could be quarterly review of utility tariffs going forward, and a number of other reasons, really. They assess that the risk to inflation seem to be elevated at this point, and they feel that there is a need for both monetary and fiscal tightening to try to rein in that outlook, really. And so it was on the basis of that they hiked the rate by 50 basis points. Reasons are quite sound, no qualms about it at this point, really. But they just bring back the question, as growth is slowing or is expected to slow down and policy stance is tightening, how do we stimulate economic activity? Their response is that, yes, these are maybe concerns, but I think the balance of risk weigh heavily on inflation now than growth. And that is why the decision, really. So we are where we are.
Yeah, well, not everybody agrees with the central bank's approach. In fact, last week, the Institute for Economic Affairs insisted that over-reliance on the policy rate in addressing high inflation would yield no positive results. Is saying this thing is not working, Courage?
Well, it's a good call, and I guess I was advancing not exact, but a related argument, really. But again, the issue is that you look at countries around us, Egypt, you look at Kenya, you look at Nigeria, even the US and the many other countries, it looks like the food inflation pressure, South Africa inclusive, is not exclusive to Ghana. It actually cuts across. So the question becomes, what could be the main driver of the food price pressures, really? If COVID is easing, supply chains are recovering, and all of that, what could be the major driver? I think that is what we need to unlock. But the reality is that food inflation is quite elevated, 54% and counting, and it has been the trend for the last few months, really. So it begs watching for us to sustain and anchor inflation expectations going forward. So while I thought we could have made do with maybe a hold, a 50 basis point hike, it's not too high, really. And
not
to the
too
extent
high?
that it could bring back, it's not too high an increment relative to what we've seen in recent hikes, really, where your 150s, your 200 basis points are the ones we've seen. 50 basis points pales in the shadow of what we've seen in recent times, really. And the fact that the intention is to help firmly anchor inflation expectations, which would ultimately bring back economic activity, we just give the central bank the benefit of the doubt as to how they intend to achieve that. And we would look at how it evolves over the next few months, really.
Well, I know businesses, for instance, wouldn't be excited about this, seeing the implications, for instance, on interest rates. And so what do we need to do? You talk about stimulating economic growth. What do we need to do so that we get the policy rate to come down somewhat?
Well, it will mean that we need to accelerate efforts. I see from the fiscal account that, yes, revenue has fallen short and we've also compressed expenditure quite significantly. But I believe that a chunk of that expenditure savings that we are seeing is largely due to the forfeited interest payment on DDP and an external debt service that we have suspended since, really. Now, so if you look at the real expenditures government plan, minus the savings from these debt exchange, really, how are we doing? Those are the color we would like to see on Thursday when the finance minister comes to Parliament with the media review, really. The point I'm making is that we would have to tighten both fiscal and monetary controls to the level that is appropriate to bring down inflation. Other than that, monetary policy could go on a tightening spree, but we might not see the disinflation that we want if the other variables in the equation are not actually controlled properly. And so we will need to see the push from the fiscal side of things also. And I'm particularly interested in what would have been deficit if we had not forfeited maybe interest payment, really. That will give us a sense to what extent government is tightening and not just the interest savings that we are recording, really.
Okay, Courage, 30 seconds if you can. Quick thoughts on tomorrow's presentation of the mid-year budget. Any expectations from your end?
Well, from the look of things, yes, it's early days yet. Revenue measures were just passed in May, but revenue seems to be a problem. Over the half year, we've seen 10 billion deficits in revenue. Will that mean new tax policies or new tax interventions? I dare say I do not expect that, because then it will bother on insensitivity and it will bother on even worsening the hardship, really. So that and more on fiscal controls and how to achieve the target is really what the broad expectation is. And that the circumstances that do not expect new policy interventions, really. They will just be adjusting the fiscal framework to reflect the realities of our time. And that is what I look forward to.
All right, Courage Boti, just hang on. I want to bring in my colleague, George Riafe, who is joining us from the Bank of Ghana's press briefing with more. Good afternoon to you, George. So we know that the central bank decided to increase the policy rate because of the threats to inflation. What other reasons were given for the increase?
You're right on that when you talk about the fact about the threat to inflation, but also there are issues about growth here and the expected impact of the next round of the domestic debt exchange program. And that is why the governor maintained or argued that it is prudent to take this marginal adjustment. And one quick thing that Daryl, he added also was that they will move in again to hike the rate if the need arises or it is necessary, because he maintained that they will continue on this path to ensure that they bring inflation rate to an appreciable level. So, Daryl, one thing I can tell you that this might not be the end in terms of the hikes that we're going to see, as long as inflation rate might be on the high or outside the Bank of Ghana's target.
I'm told you had a question for Courage, something you wanted him to react to. Can you hear me, George?
Daryl, it has to do with the fact that when you look at the Ghana city as well. Yeah, I can hear you, Daryl. And if you Daryl, if you can hear me, when you look at the Ghana city, the governor was maintaining or arguing that they see the reasons for the stability due to the fact that it has to do with the IMF program and also some monetary measures that they have taken. And therefore, they believe that going forward, the city would be firmly stable. But again, there are another quick issue that one would also want to ask is that going forward, if the debt stock is being attributed to the spike in the challenge with the Ghana city, if the city should firmly stabilize today, we'll see the debt stock maybe stabilizing as well. Then is it prudent, Daryl, some would argue, that whether the policy rate should be increased again as well, since the Bank of Ghana has signaled that they will continue to hike the rate to try and bring the situation under control?
We'll get Kari to react to the issue concerning the city, but what has the governor been talking about concerning the banking sector? Any new developments there to expect?
Well, Daryl, you're right. And interestingly, Daryl, as to the half-year results, the governor maintained or actually disclosed that the profits have also picked up again. So in terms of profits, what we saw in the first half or first quarter of this year, there has also been a strong growth in the profit numbers up to the half of this year. Also, Daryl, when you look at all the major indicators when it comes to assessing liquidity, when it's doing the stress tests, the governor in his report also maintained that all these indicators are quite strong for the banking sector. And so if we continue on this path, we are indeed going to see the commercial banks being quite stable going forward. And what we saw in last year, maybe we can say that it could be described as a thing of the past in terms of the shocks that hit the commercial banks, their profits, their liquidity numbers, and non-performing loans and all those things. Maybe it could be described as a thing of the past era.
Quick one on the central bank's outlook for the broader economy in relation to our deficit.
Well, Daryl, again, interestingly, the governor maintained that if you look at our program with the IMF or what government itself has programmed, we are within what has been actually agreed on when you look at the revenue and when you look at also our expenditure as well. So in terms of the fiscal operations, Daryl, there isn't anything now that should really worry us as in things getting out of hand. We're on track, and coupled with the IMF program and other measures that government is taking, we should see things firmly stabilize going forward with respect to the larger economy. Also, a quick thing about the banks as well. He actually announced that majority of the commercial banks have purchased the bullion funds that is expected to help with the protection of the transit of cash from one end to the commercial banks as well. Also, Daryl, you remember recently two commercial banks were actually suspended with respect to their forex licenses, that is Fidelity Bank and also First National Bank of South Africa. What we understand from the governor is that their licenses have been restored, and that was somewhere around 2 weeks ago. So those are some quick updates, Daryl, on the banking sector as well for our viewers. And also, all the commercial banks, Daryl, have indeed submitted their recapitalization plans to the Bank of Ghana. Remember, the governor said we are giving them up till September this year. It appears all these banks have moved quickly to send their plans to the governor of the Bank of Ghana.
Great stuff. Kari, did you catch George's questions on the city?
Yes, I guess it had to do with the debt and if the city stabilizes really, are we going to see shoots in the debt, and by extension, why do we keep hiking the policy rate? My thinking around that is, yes, partially the shoot up in the debt stock, I think, is explained by exchange rate. You can see the movement from January, pre the DP, to February, end of February numbers, where the domestic component of the debt stock increased from 232 billion to about 244. That's more than 10 billion over the period. But thereafter, it's been 244 to 246 to 247, really. What could explain those jumps beside the interest rate effect? Because from February going, interest rate has been stable, could be the continuous borrowing on the T-bill market. And of course, the DDP in itself has some arrangement which capitalize accrued interest, you know, the payment in kind arrangement and all of that. These are things that would add to the domestic debt stock, really. And we are in the process of exchanging other ones, the cocoa bills and the domestic dollar bonds, really. These will add pressure, really. But these things will not directly translate into inflation. In other words, I mean, if government succeed in exchanging these bonds, extending the tenors, reducing cash payments, it reduces liquidity in the system, and by extension, it helps the effort to control inflation, really. I guess the point about why they are tightening, like we are arguing, is that yes, there is risk to growth, but they see a lot of pressure from the food side of things, and they also see a lot of pressure from potential variations in oil prices, given the dynamics of what OPEC Plus and others are doing. And those are things they do not want to take chances on, and the reason they are hiking. I think we could have done without it, but that is their assessment, and they have the mandate to control inflation, really. So my argument will be that we just have to observe over the next few months to see how things shape up. But I honestly think that if Bank of Ghana will be successful in controlling inflation, it wouldn't have to be through policy rate adjustments alone. They would have to do their own operations as they are doing. But most importantly, the fiscal authorities would also have to tighten way more than probably what we are seeing now. And I dare say the tightening we are seeing is a lot of interest savings rather than actual expenditure controls.
So much, Courage Buti, for your perspective. Research lead at GCB Capital. Thank you so much, Courage. Now, the National Petroleum Authority is finally set to implement the National Cylinder Recirculation Program from September this year after initial setbacks. This was contained in a letter to the LPG marketers in Ghana cited by Joy Business. Now, the Directive for Marketing and Distribution of LPG seeks to ensure that the majority of Ghanaians have access to clean and safe gas for domestic and commercial use. The program will first be rolled out in the Greater Accra and Ashanti regions before extension to other parts of the country. Well, joining me on Zoom is Vice President of the LPG Marketers Association of Ghana, Gabriel Kumi. Good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. So can you confirm if you have received any communication from the National Petroleum Authority and what more was said about the rollout of the CRM, i.e. timing, what will be required of LPG marketers?
That's a lot of questions. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. About a month ago, we received a letter from NPA stating that in September they will want to start the full implementation of the cylinder recirculation model. Let me state that we have been very cooperative with NPA over the years to try and see how best we can implement this policy in the country. We as an association, I must stress that we don't have anything against the policy per se. We believe that government can only govern through the implementation of policies and programs. So we have no problem if government wants to introduce a policy in our sector. But then we should also be able to speak up if the policy is being implemented in a way that will be detrimental to the survival and existence of the industry players who have built the industry over the years. When we received a letter from NPA, we also responded. In fact, we gave NPA a response to their letter of implementing the CRM in September. Our letter went last week. That letter raises our concerns and our position on the way forward. And we gave a timeline of about 2 weeks to be able to hear from NPA on our position and our concerns. I would want us to give respect to NPA because we have given them a letter. They haven't come back to us with a response yet. We are hearing that possibly this week we are likely to meet NPA on the letter we sent them. So I wouldn't want us to discuss the content of our letter until we have met NPA or until NPA has responded to the letter. We gave a timeline of 2 weeks, and it's barely 1 week since that letter got to NPA. So we want to give them that respect and then see what their responses will be. After that, we can discuss our concerns in details. But obviously, we do have some serious, very serious concerns. And we have made our position very, very, very clear. And it's a position that we hold very, very, very clear, that we are not going to compromise on those positions.
Are you able to share any of those concerns, and what would you recommend as the way forward in implementing the CRM, since you say it's not a bad idea anyway?
Yes, we, like I did indicate earlier, I really don't want us to delve into the concerns that we have sent to them. I really want us to give them that respect. But one thing I can say is that this is not a greenfield. This is an industry that has been in existence for the past 30 years. Per the implementation of cylinder recirculation model, you are not introducing a new industry. You are only trying to apply a new strategy to an existing industry. So and this is an industry that is so entrenched in the country. There is a need for you to be very, very, very careful the way you go about it. You don't go about it as if we haven't sold LPG in Ghana before. This is the first time we are going to start selling LPG. We are operating on a brownfield, if I should say. So we will caution that there is a lot of investment that has gone down the drain. We have over 700 LPG retail outlets across the country. We have over 600 LPG trucks distributing LPG across the country. There is a need for you to be very, very, very careful the way you introduce this, so you don't throw a lot of investment down the drain. Because majority of these investments were done through facilities from banks and other financial institutions. And there's a need for us to also look at the consuming public. If a policy like this is coming to replace a policy that has been in existence for 30 years, that consumers are used to for 30 years, there is a need for you to be very, very careful the way you implement it.
All right, so we are going to keep monitoring this, Mr. Kumi, to see what the reaction or the reply from the National Petroleum Authority would be to this, these concerns you have raised. And then I'm certainly sure we're going to come back to you and discuss the way forward. Thank you so much for speaking with us this afternoon. That was Gabriel Kumi, who is the Vice President of the LPG Marketers Association. And that's the marketplace, everybody. More news on our website, myjoyonline.com/business. Our top story, Bank of Ghana hikes policy rate by 50 basis points to 30%. You can read more about that. We'll have some more reactions to this also on Business Live. Plus, total mobile money transactions hit 859 billion cedis in first half of 2023. That's according to the Bank of Ghana as well. myjoyonline.com/business. We'll see you same time tomorrow.